Welcome to Networking RX, a podcast devoted to helping business professionals like you enhance your networking skills in order to become more proficient giving and receiving quality business referrals and improving the overall quality of your life and the lives of those around you. The Networking RX podcast is a production of AmSpirit Business Connections, an organization whose mission is to empower business success through networking.
Welcome back for another episode of the Networking RX podcast. I am your host, Frank Agin, founder and president of AmSpirit Business Connections. Today I want to talk about measuring inputs and outputs with respect to networking, building relationships, getting referrals. I have said, others have said, you have probably heard it. When you get into networking, you need to give without expectation. You need to do things and not really be concerned about what's coming back to you. And when you're worried about things that are coming back to you, you're really worried about the outputs of networking. And that's a real challenge, a real slippery slope. That's fraught with all sorts of problems for really lots of reasons. First, let me say this. I'm a big proponent of measuring your inputs. I did an episode a little while back, not too long ago, on the giving journal and how I got into the mindset of trying to give to other people. More or less, what I did was I just kept a journal. I just kept a little log. It was just a notebook of when I did things for people, when I did things in general, when I volunteered, when, not every time I was encouraging or something like that, but if I gave referrals, if I made introductions. And it wasn't for the purpose of keeping score in the sense that I could go back and say to somebody, hey, I did this for you. What about me? It was just my way of keeping myself focused on giving to others. Because it's very easy the way our minds work, it's very easy for us to look at something, to give once, and then just keep reflecting back on that and saying, of course I'm generous. I handed out water bottles at the road race. I did this one thing. And our minds fixate on that. Our minds really are designed to protect us, and part of protecting us is protecting our egos, and so we're going to be looking for the information. It's a bias, it's a confirmation bias. We're going to be looking for the information that supports who we are and the good things about us, and that's just human nature. I'm not saying we can't look past that and be self-critical. Certainly we are, and that's certainly that does happen. That's a whole nother conversation. But what I have seen from time to time is, most people consider themselves a giver, but when you press them as to, okay, what have you done? It's like they kind of clam up. It's not that they don't want to share. It's, I can't really think of it. It's a lot of things, and they really can't come up with an answer. At any rate, I don't want to repeat that whole episode. It was episode 339, which I did released last summer. It was released on June 29th of last summer. At some point, I'll recycle that so it plays again, but you can easily go find it, episode 339, called The Giving Journal, and that will kind of give you, walk you through my mindset on focus on giving. But that's just one way of measuring your inputs, what you're doing. Keeping track of keeping track of one-on-ones, keeping track of times you have calls, Zoom calls, if somebody's not local, or maybe having coffee with somebody, and just setting metrics for yourself, saying I'm going to do this many times a week. 3 times a week I'm going to have a Zoom call where I'm networking with somebody new. 5 times a week I'm going to be having a reconnection call with somebody. I'm going to be reaching out to people I've lost touch with. Once a month I'm going to reconnect with somebody I've lost contact with and just try and reestablish a relationship. That's what I mean by measuring inputs. The things you're doing, the things you really have control over. Either you do those things or you don't. You either adopt a giving journal or you don't. You either go volunteer time or you don't. You reach out to somebody that you've lost track with or you don't. You can't control whether they're going to follow through on that, but you certainly have control as to the inputs. With respect to the outputs, again, you don't have control as to what's happening there. I don't think there's anything wrong with just kind of measuring things as to what's effective. People do that all the time with respect to posts and emails. They'll compare emails they send out in email campaigns, A versus B. A is a little different than B, or maybe it's substantially different, but you're just kind of measuring what's most effective. And that's really not a conversation with respect to networking, but there's nothing wrong with looking at a networking event and saying, okay, you know what, there's not a lot of people here, or most of the people here are, not really the crowd I want to be networking with. And so you can certainly measure outputs with respect to that. But what I'm not a fan of is people who will keep track of things, keep score for the purpose of saying, well, I did something for somebody and I've never gotten anything in return. My way of looking at it is I do things for people and I'm not really concerned as to what they do for me. But what I am kind of concerned with is what are they doing in general? For example, if you do things for somebody and they never, they're never doing anything for anybody. It's just it's all about them. I find that my efforts are wasted at that point. That doesn't mean that I'm never going to do anything for them, because a lot of times when I end up doing things, especially when I'm making an introduction, there's really two parties to it. So you can have somebody who it's really all about them, and somebody that you're introducing them to, and it might seem like, wow, you're doing something for somebody who appears to be somewhat selfish. Well, the reality is really I'm trying to serve the other person. And I just believe that the first person, who might be selfish, can service has what this other person needs. And just because somebody's selfish doesn't mean they're not a good business person or not a good person. It's just they're not a great networking partner is really what it boils down to. But what I really want to talk about in this episode is, if you're prone to the measurement sorts of things, and again, don't waste too much time trying to keep score. But as you measure these things, you have to be measuring apples to apples, oranges to oranges, and not apples to oranges. And some of the things I hear from time to time are people who will say something like, I never got anything from that. I never got anything that turned into a financial return, a financial gain. I never made money off of anything from this networking sorts of thing. This, whether it's an AmSpirit group or a BNI group or a networking event or whatever, they'll make a comment like, I never got anything. I've never, I can't point to any dollars that were a result of that group, any direct dollars. And then at the same time, they'll say, but I did all sorts of things for the situation. And what they say they did, they don't know that it turned into any dollars. They just assumed what they did turned into hard dollars. And even if it did turn into hard dollars, you really can't compare the two situations. Sometimes somebody's going to do something for you, make an introduction, and it won't be immediate money, but it might be something down the line. And so you never really can judge. A lot of times when I'm introduced to people, it might be 2, 3, 4 connections down the line that it turns into something. So it's, you know, it would be foolish of me to stop networking with somebody just because I might have done something for them that turned into something immediate for them, and kind of scoff at what they did for me because it's taking 3, 4 other calls or meetings or relationships for something to manifest itself. The reality is it worked. Something is coming from it. It's just, by the very nature of what it is I'm looking for and who they are, that might be whatever they've done for me might be the best way that they can serve me. And, their heart's in the right place and they're certainly trying to serve me. And that's what matters most. Not really the output from it. It's just their intent to try and help me. And again, you don't know what's coming from those things. Sometimes those are situations where people might need a little coaching. That's not exactly who I'm looking for. I appreciate the thought, but here's why that doesn't work. And I do see people doing that from time to time as well. They'll sort of scoff at something they've got, and yeah, they made an introduction. It was a big waste of time. Well, did you talk to them about why it was potentially a waste of time? Kind of let them know what your thinking was. Because they may think that's perfect. And if you don't correct them, then you're just going to get more bad stuff. Nobody purposefully, let me say that clearly, purposefully does things wrong. A lot of times it's they think they're doing a good thing, especially when their introductions are made. They think they understand what it is you're looking for. And that might not be the case. So you can't really measure that, or you need to certainly take that opportunity to say, hey, that's really not on point. Certainly the onus is on them a little bit too to follow up and say, hey, how did that go? Is this a good referral for you? Does this make sense? And I'll ask that from time to time. Does this make sense? Are these things helpful? And you might be surprised. You might think it's a nothing sort of connection, a nothing sort of introduction or referral or information or opportunity, and it might turn out to be just an amazing thing. Or you might think it's an amazing thing that you're passing on to somebody, and they might be like, yeah, it's not really what I'm looking for. I can't operate in that space for whatever reason. We don't have a product that'll serve that. But then again, it harkens back to when I was an attorney. I would tell people, giving me referrals, go ahead and give me referrals to, things. Even I knew, I didn't want to do domestic law. I didn't want to do divorce. But if you have a client that needs help in that area, bring them to me, because I can certainly learn about their situation and then help them find the right person. And when I find them the right person, I'm then on the phone with a domestic attorney, in this example, and saying, hey, I've got a referral for you. And by having that opportunity to serve the domestic attorney in that way, they feel, things will come back from that. Again, I'm not measuring, but it just increases the likelihood. I'm trying to make things happen. I'm doing things for other people, as opposed to just saying, yeah, I can't help them. Just keep them away from me. And I get it. You might be tremendously busy and not wanting to take the time to do it. But what you need to realize is that there is an opportunity there. There isn't, somebody referring you somebody that you can't necessarily service, doesn't mean it's worth nothing. It might not have an immediate value to you, but it's probably got an immediate value to somebody. And by you taking the time, making the effort to refer it on to that person who could certainly benefit from it, you're serving the greater good of the community, and the person you're referring them to. And I have attorneys in mind as I'm thinking about this. You're certainly, doing the things that you're certainly serving people. You're serving the person who needs, again, the attorney in my mind, as well as you're serving the person who's ending up with the referral. And both of those things serve to benefit people. And you're putting inputs into your networking world. Now, you can't control the outputs, again, but you're putting inputs in. So I mean, there's a lot to this. There's a lot to, the inputs and outputs of networking. But the bottom line is the only thing you can control are your inputs. You're welcome to measure the outputs to the extent you would like. Measuring the inputs is probably the best thing. But if you want to kind of keep a pulse on the outputs, that's okay. It's certainly okay. But don't get into the keeping score game. And as if you're looking to measure outputs, make sure you're comparing apples to apples and not apples to oranges, because it'll drive you mad. Just, geez, I'm doing so much and getting nothing in return. And I see that all the time. And I just, I don't always believe it, but just some things to think about as you're out there networking.
Thanks for joining us on the Networking RX podcast. Please put what you've learned into action today and let us know if you have questions, comments, or ideas for future topics. You can email them to us at podcast@amspirit.com. That's AmSpirit.com. Finally, so you never miss an episode, be sure to subscribe to the Networking RX podcast through iTunes, Overcast, or however you receive your podcasts. Now get out and network with someone.
The Networking RX podcast is the copyright production of AmSpirit Business Connection. All rights reserved.